o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Jillian Dale, and I am the East Coast STEM representative for Boxlight. I am a former STEM teacher, and I'm very excited to be talking to you today about how to engage young girls in STEM. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm a former teacher. I taught fourth grade math and science, and I also taught STEAM to grades kindergarten through 8. I was an instructional coach, and I formally observed teachers as well, focusing on math teachers, but also new teachers as well. I ran an after-school program called STEM for Girls, where we focused on STEM education, specifically for young girls and how to empower them into pursuing different careers in STEM. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to engage young girls in STEM. We're going to cover the need for STEM education, as well as implementing a STEM program and the goals that you might want to consider for implementing that sort of program. And then we're also going to discuss our perceptions of people in STEM. Okay, so the first question that I would like to know is what grades and subjects do you teach? So I just launched a poll. If you could go ahead and answer that question, it can be a grade range. You may teach all subjects. Just let me know in the poll what grades and subjects that you teach. See, we've got a lot of math and science teachers, but also some related arts teachers, music, art, and PE. Okay, thank you to those who participated. We have, quite a big range, everything from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade. So that's a good group that we've got in here. So my next question is, how familiar are you with the challenges that girls often face in pursuing STEM education careers? Got a lot of people somewhat familiar with some of the challenges that girls are facing in their pursuit of STEM. So thank you for answering those. All right, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the chart that you see here is comparing the average salaries for STEM careers versus non-STEM careers by education levels. And you can see on average that STEM careers are not only more lucrative at any education level, but people also in STEM careers are less likely to experience job loss. So that's really important when we're making up our mind for what career path we want to pursue. Of all the jobs in the workforce, 24% of them are STEM jobs. And since 1990, the number of STEM jobs has increased by 79%, and it's going to continue to grow. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, STEM occupations are projected to grow 10.8% in the next 10 years, and that's compared to only 4.9% of growth for all careers. So STEM jobs are growing, but the skills for those jobs are not catching up. The next few statistics might alarm you, and they should. As a country, we really need to make some changes on how we approach STEM starting at the elementary level, because 92% of boys and 97% of girls lose interest in STEAM if they're not engaged by 5th grade. That to me is alarming. That's quite a large percentage, and only 6% of high school seniors will earn a bachelor's degree in a STEAM field. According to the National Science and Engineering Statistics, males make up 65% of the STEM workforce, while females make up 35% of the STEM workforce. 65% of the STEM workforce is white or Caucasian, 15% Hispanic or Latino, 10% Asian, 9% Black or African American, and 2% multiracial, and less than 1% American Indian or Alaskan Native. Representation matters because it impacts students' self-efficacy or their ability to see themselves as a STEM career. A survey was conducted in Seattle on children picking up stereotypes for people who use math and science, and they surveyed school-age children up to 2nd grade. And what they found is that 75% of those students already have that preconceived notion that science and math was not for girls. So when starting a STEM program, it's important to focus on building that engineering mindset. The engineering mindset helps students persist through problems, to look at failures as opportunities for growth or change, and to build self-confidence in their abilities to solve problems independently. Other essential skills are developed through the engineering mindset as well, such as social emotional learning, language acquisition, and also fine and gross motor skills. We want students to focus on we want to focus on a few more components for students to experience the most success. Our objectives are to increase engagement in STEM, are to build confidence, to foster independent thinking, to build relationships, and also to build intrinsic motivation. In my STEM program, I wanted to focus on shifting student responsibility. I wanted students to take more ownership for their learning, and so I used a gradual release inquiry-based approach. I knew I wanted to utilize inquiry pedagogy, but I wanted to eventually get students to pose a question and then investigate possible solutions all on their own without being prompted. This was a challenge at first because the girls were very reluctant to try new things, to not get things right the first go around, and to essentially have that growth or engineering mindset. So we started with a very structured inquiry. The first experiment we completed was called strawberry DNA. We were supposed to extract the DNA from a strawberry, which if you haven't done it, it's Steve Spangler science. I highly recommend. Very, very fun, very cool. But the girls were also tasked with following very precise directions and also working together while making observations. So while this task was challenging for students to complete alone, they quickly realized the experiment was best completed in groups. So while working in groups, students would collaborate on the next steps, and this was important in terms of fostering that independent thinking. Students are understanding diverse perspectives in groups, engaging in collaborative problem solving, encourages students to think critically, analyze information, and generate creative solutions, while also considering the input of others. The second experiment we did was called Drops on a Penny, where students are investigating not only how much water could fit on a penny, but also the scientific concept behind the experiment. So they were given the tools, but no directions on how to complete the task. And after a few trials, they completed it, and we discussed the properties of water, which led to several students to consult Google for more research. I prompted no further questions, and within a few minutes, the students were researching surface tension and water cohesion. And this prompted another student to ask about, the surface tension of the ocean and why the water stays in place, which led to more research about tides and Earth's magnetic field. And this all stemmed from dropping water on a penny. So great discussions and great discoveries, new thinking, new ideas, all in one afternoon. The girls opened themselves up to the joy of learning. The third challenge was definitely a student favorite because they got to choose their experiment. I think TikTok played a little bit of a role in student choices, but they were all still very great. Students made ice cream in a bag, clouds in a jar, fake blood. They grew bacteria and tracked its growth over time. They made slime and elephant toothpaste. They were in charge of writing their own procedures, materials, and observations. And then they were tasked with researching that scientific concept behind their experiment. So they were researching chemical reactions and coagulation and how bacteria and mold can impact the human body and states of matter. And most importantly, they were having fun while they were learning. And this was an important shift on how the girls began approaching new ideas. They listened to each other and had more independence during experiments. Each phase of the inquiry gave the students a little bit more autonomy. The goal of this type of teaching had the original objectives in mind: build confidence, foster independent thinking, build relationships, build intrinsic motivation. So we continued with that approach as we're working through the rest of the goals of our club. Part of the club, we went on an overnight camping field trip, and I could first see their confidence in action. Some of the students had never left the 5-mile radius of our little town. And one of the activities that we completed on this overnight camping trip was called trail survival. And the girls learned important survival skills such as building a fire. They learned about the components of a fire: oxygen, fuel, and heat. And within minutes, they were attempting to build a fire. They were given 2 matches, kindling, and some dryer lint. And I remember feeling so apprehensive at first, thinking, what kind of a teacher am I to let my students play with fire? But that's not what they were doing. They were learning. Each child took the task very seriously. No one was playing with fire. And remember, they only had 2 matches to work with. They were safe and they were monitored by myself and 2 other trail guides. And when the girls got the fire started, the trail guide helped sustain the fire and we cooked our lunch on it. And you could see the sense of pride on the girls' faces as they ate their hot lunch on the trail that day, which was very helpful because it was raining and cold. So it was great that they were able to start the fire. So in order to build confidence, you should really focus on encouraging curiosity and risk-taking, fostering that growth mindset, encouraging self-expression, and adapting your plans by being flexible and trusting the process. That wouldn't have happened if I would have just taken over and started the fire myself. But something changed in those girls after they were able to complete that task on their own. And it was, it's the reason why we teach. It's the reason why we're there. We want students to think independently. We want them to come up with their own strategies and ideas to solve problems, to find better solutions. And we did this using our guided inquiry and the gradual release model. So we can encourage independent thinking by encouraging questionings, allow the students to notice and wonder, promote self-directed learning. And this was completed in that gradual release process when the girls finally got to that open inquiry. Problem-solving challenges. Give students the opportunity to solve problems in their own way by posing open-ended questions. Provide autonomy in assignments. Encourage collaborative learning that allows students to view multiple perspectives, which in turn can help them work through their own thinking. And finally, encourage reflection and metacognition. When students are aware of their own learning, magic happens. Studies have shown that metacognition has a significant impact on student achievement. A great resource to support your guided and open inquiries is this book called Question, Claims, and Evidence. Okay. So children are often faced with many hardships these days, and their resilience is truly inspiring. And we can foster that resilience by building genuine connections with the students. Teachers play an important role in a child's life, and that role can bring out a child's best qualities and make them flourish as an individual. Forming a quality relationship with each student is imperative, but it's not an easy task. Sometimes the child who needs the most support asks for it in the most challenging ways. The first step is to get to know the child. Ask her questions and listen to her responses. Remember her responses and ask her about them again later. This shows that you have a genuine interest in her life. So go to the basketball games. Give up having your lunch in a teacher's lounge to have lunch with the kid who is struggling. Form an alliance with the child's family and be consistent. If we want students to build relationships with their peers, we have to create an environment where they feel safe, and that begins with the student and the teacher's relationship. Foster student-to-student relationship by encouraging children to step out of their comfort zone and get to know other students. During our club, I would stand at the doorway with a stack of cards, and each child received a card, and that card determined who they would sit by that day and who they would work with. It was completely random, and the students got used to not working with the same person each time. It was a struggle at first, but they got used to it. I overheard a conversation between two students one day, and it reiterated in my head why I'm doing this and why I'm making sure that I'm grouping students the way I am. One student had lost her baby sister in a house fire a few years prior and hadn't shared much of her experience or her heartache with anyone, but she opened up to her partner that day. Her partner had recently lost a family member, and they were discussing how hard it is to lose someone that you love, something that's hard for 9 and 10-year-olds to process. These two girls had never talked before outside of the club. They were in different grades and ran around with different people. They had different friends. But on that day, they left with a better understanding of each other and with empathy for each other. And those genuine connections are so powerful to every human, but they are especially powerful to young people. So have the icebreakers, play the games, host community and class meetings, give each child a chance to express themselves. And I can't express the importance of this next part enough. When they speak, listen and listen well. Listen to understand and not to respond. When we model this to students, they too will listen to understand rather than just to respond, to wait for you to stop talking so that they can start talking. That's not the goal here. We want them to listen to understand. Okay, so far we've discussed the importance of building confidence, fostering independent thinking, building relationships. And the last essential piece of supporting girls in STEM is going to be nurturing that intrinsic motivation. And this is done through, building the other objectives that we've already talked about, but it's also essential for students to redefine what they think a scientist looks like, and for students to see women and people of color represented in these fields. So now I want for you to do me a favor. I want you to picture a scientist. What is your scientist wearing? What does your mental image look like? Where is your scientist working? Take about 10 seconds, think about your scientist, have that person pictured in your mind, and I'm going to launch a poll, and I want you to select all that apply to the scientist that was in your head. I love these responses that I'm seeing. Okay. I love that I'm seeing a lot of female scientists answered here. That's what we like to see. Here's one thing I noticed. The majority of people, so 88%, think that a scientist is wearing a lab coat. And let's see, 63% believe that a scientist is working in a lab. And we are dead tied for crazy hair and normal hair. Okay. All right, thanks for playing along with that one. So after a quick Google search, here's what Google thinks a scientist looks like. And it's not far from what children believe a scientist looks like. I was teaching STEM to kindergarten through 8th grade students, and I asked them to either draw a scientist or write down a scientist's physical attributes. And of the students who completed the task, 70% of them thought a scientist was male with crazy hair and glasses and a lab coat. On average, only 30% of students thought that a scientist could look like a female. And the data was even more alarming for the earlier grades. Only 12.5% of kindergartners thought a scientist could look like a female, compared to 40% of middle schoolers who thought a scientist could look like a female. What I find most alarming about these statistics is how closely they align with the actual statistics of people represented in STEM careers. Remember, that was 35% female and 65% male. so close to what children believe a scientist is represented. So in order to change this, we have to start exposing students to successful women and people of color in the STEM workforce, starting at the earliest elementary level. So in my after school club, we began investigating one scientist per week. And we started with the pioneers of women in STEM. We studied Marie Curie and Madam C.J. Walker, Katherine Johnson and Amelia Earhart. And I found that the girls loved investigating how these women overcame adversity and defied odds just as much as they liked studying their contributions to the STEM field. We discussed how women today are still facing these adversities, which led us into another investigation. Which women are leading the STEM workforce today? Who is making change now? Social media, the word that prompts immediate response, immediate emotion. Social media is ruining our children. We've heard this time and time again. And while I don't disagree that children are exposed to things on social media that they shouldn't be, it can also be a very powerful platform for learning. So I put together a list of women that were paving the way for my students to find successful careers in STEM, all of whom I found on social media platforms. So we learned about Kelly Girardi, an astronaut in training, and she's also the author of a book called Luna Muna. We studied Kelly Knight, who is a forensic science professor, and she's also pursuing a PhD in STEM education. And we learned about Dr. Raven Baxter, a molecular biologist and science educator. And she wrote her doctoral dissertation studying how relatable representation of scientists in the media impacts perceptions of science. And this led into another discussion. Who is leading the STEM workforce in our community? So I saw how this was impacting the girls' perceptions of a scientist, and I wanted to make the experience even more meaningful. So we hosted a panel of local women in STEM. We had an environmental engineer, a registered nurse, a technology integration specialist, and my personal favorite, a senior software administrator. Although she is my favorite because she's my mom, so I'm a little biased. The students loved hearing about the different careers in the STEM field that were unfamiliar to them, but they also loved hearing about the education and the background that these women had, everything that they had gone through, and the challenges that they had faced being a woman in a field often held or ran by men. They were curious about the schooling in their lives and asked questions about their personal lives, and the entire time you could hear a pin drop. I mean, the students were so engaged and so enthralled with these women, and it ignited a passion in them to make them want to pursue careers in STEM. And for the girls to be able to see and speak to real women in STEM, it was so meaningful. And it made the idea of pursuing a career in STEM more obtainable. Okay. There we go. So just to recap, there is a growing need for STEM skills to support the workforce. It's imperative to begin building that engineering mindset at an early age. And representation of successful women and people of color in STEM is essential. As a STEM representative for Boxlight, I'm constantly thinking about how I would have used these products to mold my STEM curriculum. In my after-school club for girls, as a STEAM teacher, as a fourth grade math and science teacher, having access to my STEM kits, which is our curriculum platform, I would have been able to use 3D printing so much more, emphasizing engineering design challenges. And according to the US Department of Labor, 8 out of 10 most wanted employees were ones with STEM education backgrounds. So our goal as educators should be to empower students with these STEM skills starting at the earliest level. I was nervous to leave the classroom, but I knew I wanted to affect change at a higher level. And when I found Boxlight, I was so impressed that Boxlight will help schools write grants, provide STEM solutions, and then also hold professional development for these schools and teachers as well to prevent these solutions from becoming very expensive paperweights. Boxlight supports my core philosophy of teaching through and through. All students deserve equitable opportunities to experience success and can benefit from hands-on learning. Thank you so much for attending this week's STEM Wednesday Learning Lab. If you would like any more information on these products or how we can support a STEM program, simply just fill out the last question in today's Zoom. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to type them in the chat, and I will either get those answered now, or I will send you an email and get those questions answered to you. Hannah, good question. When you were doing the open-ended experiments with your students, how did you choose the topics, or did they? So they sort of chose the topics, but within parameters. So some of them, we really tried to move away from just the simple slime process. We wanted things to be a little bit more complex. However, I found that when those first few experiments, if you really focus on what the girls are interested in, you're going to have the most buy-in, right? You're going to have the most engagement. So I felt that it was essential for me to make sure that I was considering, their choices. So we would often, say, okay, you have 3 choices today. Let me know what experiments you want. We'll work through which one we think is best, which one we think that you're going to get the most learning out of. So that's kind of how we went through that. Yeah, Hannah, I love that you say that you love these current scientists. They feel more relevant and relatable. It was wild to watch the shift between teaching about girls, teaching the girls about the scientists that existed, 100 years before their time, to teaching about scientists that exist now. It was very, very meaningful for the girls and more relatable for them to be exposed to these women in STEM that are active. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. We will see you again next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.